Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For our free wire video tutorial on YouTube today, I'd like to share with you my QuickLinks owl. Now it can be worn as a pendant or you can make that as a wall art piece. It's entirely up to you. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look at the project and then we'll make one together. So this is our QuickLinks owl. You could use that as a pendant or as wall art. So in terms of ingredients for today's tutorial, I have a pair of 12mm puffy round beads. These are fancy faceted glass, but I've used plain smooth discs of golden colour metal over on that side. I also have 3mm faceted rounds or rondelles, and I've got 7 of those. I'm going to be using a tassel drop. Now you can add this in as you're making the piece, or you can add it in with a jump ring later, or you can even use head pins and beads if you want a slightly different look. Main feature today is a 30mm quick link. I've gone for the faceted gold type and these are from Beadalon. Let's just pop that down for a second. In terms of wire and in terms of tools, we're going to be working with 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and this is around about 10 or 11 inches, which is sufficient for today's project. We'll also be adding in approximately 2 feet or 24 inches of 0.4mm 26 gauge later. I'm also going to be using a handy tool, which is this wood mandrel, 12.7mm, so just slightly larger than those beads, which are going to form the eye of our owl. So you can use a marker pen or similar. So we're going to start off by making this lovely and smooth and warm. Just going to grip hold of one end and then run that between thumb and forefinger, just to get some nice fluidity. Now halfway along this piece we're going to want a nice loop shape, so I'm going to grab in my memory wire finishing pliers. You could measure if you wanted an exact halfway house, but I'm just going to eyeball it and then just switch that over so that we have a loop down at the base and then a straight line on top of that loop, like so. If you struggle to get that nice and straight, then you can just give that a little bit of a squish and help that into position. Now you have 2 ways that you can add the little tail feathers. I'm going to show you now that you can add the tassel directly into that loop. On the piece I made earlier on, I've added that in with an oversized jump ring. You do actually have a third option, which is to make that, instead of using a pre-made tassel, you can add on some lovely ball head pins with some beads, just to give it a little bit of movement. Up to you exactly how you do that. So I'm just going to strengthen that loop down at the bottom before I open it out slightly, and we're just going to slide that tassel into position down at the bottom. And once that sits down flat, like so, you can just squish those 2 sections of wire back together. We do want some warmth and heat in that piece though. So we're now going to add in another piece of wire. I have approximately 24 inches of 0.4mm gauge, which is equivalent to 26 gauge. And I'm going to find the center point of that finer gauge wire and start wrapping it several times around that quick link. Now there will be a little bit of a scratchy noise as that hits onto the surface below. And what we're going to do is to make sure that we band that really firmly. Now you don't particularly want to overhandle your wire tails when you're doing a job like this, because it can add to them becoming slightly weaker than you would like. So I'm probably going to go for about 8 or so wraps. If they spring apart like this, you can just scooch them back up together. So what we're looking to do is to fill the space above the loop we've created. So I'll go another couple of times, I think. Get that nice and firmly in position. Give it a little squish with your fingers and then bring your piece of wire with that tail feather section already in. So the piece of finer wire that's coming underneath is on the left, over the top on the right. So I want to get my larger piece of heavier wire to sit just down there at the base. So I will need to be able to bring the finer wire from underneath that quick link to underneath my piece of 1mm or 18 gauge wire. So if I just sit that in position, what I'm going to do is to circle the tail all the way around both the quick link and the wire, bring that all the way around all the way down to the bottom. Make sure that that's nice and neat and tidy. Give it a squish with your fingers for now. And then what I'm going to do is wrap 5 times around just the wire. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Scooch that up so it's neat and tidy again, and then I'm going to just make sure that that wire is starting to chase around the edges of my quick link. So what I will do here is go for a single wrap now around both the wire and the quick link, bring that all the way down again, pull it into position, and then I'll go for 5 wraps around just the side of the wire itself. And I'm going to repeat that pattern so that I have 5 that join the quick link and the wire together. So that's my 5th wrap. Scooch that into position. And then I'll go for another wrap around both of those pieces. So what I will do is work this in both directions. So on the other side, we'll wrap once around the quick link and the wire, and then 5 times around just the wire. Wrap around both. 5 times around the wire, wrap around both, and continue that pattern until I have 5 that wrap. So 1, 2, 3, another 2 that wrap around both of them, and I'll join you back there in a second, having repeated that on the second side as well. So I've continued with that weaving pattern, so 5 around just the wire and then 1 around the wire and the quick link until I have 5 bandings that connect the wire and the quick link together on both sides. Let's head back down to the board and we will add some more detail to this design. So 5 bands that go around both the quick link and the wire, and between them 5 wraps on just the wire. When we get to our last band that connects both pieces together, I have gone for 2 wraps on just the wire. We're now going to add in one of our small faceted 3 to 4 millimeter beads. Now you could go smaller, you could go larger, absolutely up to you. I have got round beads today. I'm working with labradorite. I have garnet over here, and in a demonstration piece I'll be showing you shortly, I have some slightly smaller citrines as well. So we're going to sit that first bead against the outside edge of the wire, and then we're going to wrap around that wire, pulling that really firmly into position so that my bead sits nicely around the outside. It's not above nor below, it's definitely on the outside of that design. I'm then going to wrap a further 2 times around that outside edge of wire, scooching those wire wraps up neatly before banding the wire again to that quick link. Pull that back through and wrapping twice around just the wire. Get that neatly into position, and then I'm going to add another bead and then another bead, each with 2 wraps, a band, 2 wraps, a bead, 2 wraps, a band. So you're repeating that same pattern. So I've continued to add those 3 beads on the side, and I shall do the same on the other side in just a moment. When we get back up to the top, I'm going to do the 2 wraps around the wire only before I band once the wire together with the quick link, and then finish off with 5 wraps just around the wire. So we get a nice balanced usage of that wire wrapping technique. So I've finished off, as I explained, with the 3 beads being set on the outside of that wire, then a band across the quick link and the wire, and then 5 single wraps around that wire itself. Trimming and cutting away as close as you can to the inside of the design just keeps things nice and neat and unlikely to catch on anything. So you might like to take a second just to make sure everything's good and straight and that you're happy before we grab in our next tool. Now, dependent on what size beads you're looking to use, that will define what size tool you want to use. So I have a 12.7 millimeter wood mandrel. This is from Beadalon again, and my little green beads are fancy faceted glass puffy beads with a nice aperture through the middle there, and they are exactly 12 millimeters, so they'll fit really nicely inside the form that we're about to make. So we need to ensure 2 things really: that the wire is formed across the top of that quick link really nicely, and secondly that it is good and toasty warm and ready to be compliant. So the wire that's coming off to the right hand side just tied together on the frame on the left here, we'll start rolling that around from far enough away that we can see just about where we'd like to situate it. So I've rotated that around to the approximate position it will end up in. And I'm just going to push that extra bit of wire over the top to make a nice eyebrow with later. Now it doesn't matter if the eyebrow is really teeny tiny, it can be flicked up, it can have a teeny tiny loop on the end, or it can just be cut away. Depends what you want to do with it really, just bearing in mind that if you don't put a loop on the end, you might catch that on something and unravel your work. So when you come to do the second piece of wire, I find it's a little bit easier just to flip it over and start rolling that away, because it will need to sit all the way over on the other side. And then you can just adjust that as you need to. Let's bring that eyebrow over the top for a second. And what you'll want to do is to ensure that these two eye areas, I suppose, eye sockets, I don't know what you'd call them, I'm not an ornithologist, they sit pretty much adjacent but not quite touching. You'll need a little bit of space in between them, but they do need to be equal and opposite to each other. They also need to be sat down against that quick link, so you might need to just pinch the wire, push that form down slightly so that it sits exactly where you want it to. If you're concerned about not having enough of an eyebrow for your owl, then you could start with, let's say, 12 inches of wire, and then you won't have really any issues. I went with a scant 10 inches and it's just ever so slightly on the edge of being only just enough. So let's just lay that down for a second and see what we think so far. Overall, I'm quite happy with the shape and form. Could have added a bit more wire, so when I put the instructions up at the beginning of the video, when I edit it, I'll suggest that you go for slightly more. Now the next thing that we're going to need to do is to tie those two pieces together. Now I have a scrap of wire left over, and it's around about 5 inches, again of that 0.4 or 26 gauge. I don't think that's going to be enough for what I need, so I'm just going to grab the reel from the other side of the desk and get myself a slightly longer length, probably about 10 inches, just to make sure that we don't run out of wire. So let's find the centrepiece of this finer gauge wire and grab our 7th small faceted bead. Now you could go for a completely different bead at this stage if you wanted to, but I'm just going to find the drill hole, which is always my least favourite part of the activity, and then we're going to sit that bead down into the middle of our 10 or so inch length of that finer gauge wire. Once that's sitting neatly in the centre, I'm just going to pop it onto the top of the design like so, and we're going to begin by wrapping 5 times around the upper section of the eye wire. Now you see it's like 1.5 tons of springy wire. It's very easy to sit the bead in position, and you can sit it slightly down if you want to, or you can have that sitting directly in between the eyes. Depends how you want the whole thing to look, absolutely up to you. You may need to just move that around slightly to adjust for whatever you want to do with the design. So let's just push that into position for now, making sure that you're in the centre of your wire, and I'm going to take the tail of the wire under just the top layer of that section of eye wire. So pull that firmly into position. We're going to wrap 5 times, and then we're going to tighten up that little bit of wrap like so, and then push the tail of wire down all the way through that piece and wrap again 5 times around just the upper section. So we're following the same banding 1 pass of wire around both pieces and then 5 around the uppermost. And then we're just going to leave that because we'll make an adder bail in a little while. I'll repeat the exact same technique on the other eye aperture. So what we would need to do there is to draw the tail of wire down, making sure your bead is sat where you want it to be, and just make sure that you're happy with the position of those eyes before you do finally sit that bead into position. It could be lower, it could be higher, absolutely how you want it to feel aesthetically. But then we're going to wrap 5 times around that upper piece. So if I bring this sideways, you'll see that there's a springy half section, a half circle of wire, and that's the only bit we're wrapping around at the moment. We're going to do that 5 times before pushing down through the middle of the eye aperture, banding those two together, and then wrapping 5 times around that upper section, 4 and 5. And at this point we're going to just hold off because we need to go over to the add a bail technique, which I've shown you a couple of times recently, but if you do need a refresher, there is a video specifically describing this technique, and it's where you create a spiral with a wrapped loop up at the top, and it enables you to turn an art form into a piece of wearable art. So if you want to wear that as a pendant, go and check out the add a bail, or just make yourself a spiral with a wrapped loop if you are already familiar with that technique. So here's a hastily made add a bail. It's basically a spiral with a wrapped loop, with or without a little spiral over the front to hide it. Absolutely up to you. So on the right hand eye aperture, my wire is coming up. So what I want to do is to make sure that I can just sneak that add a bail into a position where it will be seamless to wrap around both the add a bail and the upper part of that eye aperture. So I'm just going to pull that firmly into position, and then I'll wrap 5 times around just the upper part of that eye aperture. Give that a sneak into position. Make sure that that's super smooth and silky and tidy. You might need to take a few seconds just to compress that spring. And then I'm going to bring that wire up inside that spiral, like so that we've got 2 connection points on this piece. I think I only did 1 on that one, but belt and braces, let's make sure it all stays together. Push that down into position and then wrap again 5 more times on that upper section of the owl's eye. That's 3, 4 and 5. On that 5th one, I'm going to push the wire all the way down through the centre of the whole eye so that we can sew this again to the rear section of that eye, and then finish with 5 single wraps on that eyebrow wire. 4 and 5. Push that as neatly as you can, very, very gently coercing everything to stack together before we trim away. And then we'll just repeat the exact same process on that second side. So let's trim away. Bring the tip of your chain nose pliers in as close as you can to make sure that that end section of wire travels smoothly over the top. We'll repeat on the other side. If you feel that you need to open out that add a bail, you absolutely have the opportunity to do so. So we now have a functional hanger for our owl, whether that's for jewellery or wall art. I'm just going to show you that you can leave those eyebrows straight, or you can add a little bit of a kink to them if you want to. And then we will set those beautiful green faceted puffy beads into the eye sockets. Now, as a piece of art, I actually quite like the eyebrows coming out like so, but they are kind of spiky. So if you're going to use this as jewellery, it definitely pays to have that little bit of extra wire so that you can turn these end sections over into some nice tight loops. If you go for the looped variety, just give that a squish and a squeeze. I just want to talk to you very, very briefly. If you get to this point and you don't have enough wire because things have just gone awry, you can make the eyes smaller. I used a smaller mandrel or dowel to make these just that little bit smaller, which means that I've got more wire available to me. I'd have to find different beads, but I think some 8mm beads would go in there really nicely. And then you would trim away the wire so that it's equal lengths so that you can get those little loops. So it's just a little bit of an alternative, and that's got that 2mm faceted citrine. So I'll just pop him down over there for a second and we'll work on this little fella here. So if you do want to just bring that up, all we're going to do is turn the tiniest loop on the end, and I would say probably using your round nose pliers because you can exert just a bit more pressure. Make the smallest loop you possibly can and you'll still have that effect, and it will just put a nice little full stop to your weaving as well. So just make sure that you've got a really good solid grip on everything. Turn those to the tiniest little loops that you can and get the end of that wire beyond the end of the weaving, and then everything will still look pretty cute. So I've got a small scrap of that 0.4mm from earlier on, and that's going to be plenty for me to add my little beads into the eye sockets. Now, if you find that your beads won't go in, if things have gone awry, then one quick way to save that is to just pop it on the end of your ring mandrel very, very softly. Just push that down a tiny bit, very, very gently, and you'll find that you win just enough space to fit that bead into position, because sometimes with the best will in the world, things don't always go as you want them to, not always the way you have it planned. So to set the eyes, I'm going to turn the design upside down. I'm going to take about 1/2 inch over the end of the piece of eye where there's only one layer of wire, and I'm going to wrap around 5 times. Now normally when I'm doing wraps I go for 3s because I think it's really attractive and it just seems right, but today I've gone for 5s, and I thought we would continue that theme just a little bit further so that we've got 5 good wraps holding those beads in position. So just over 1/2 inch of excess wire over the end, and that's plenty to take that tail all the way around. I'm making a terrible job of this today for multiple reasons, not least of which is that I'm holding it really funny in the camera. So let's just make sure that that end is tucked neatly away inside the eye socket, which sounds terribly painful. There we go, got it. And then what we're going to do is scooch that up to the top so that it sits just underneath that eyebrow. And then we're going to add one of our chosen beads. Hopefully I will be able to find the hole in the bead a little bit easier. So what we've done is we've made a way for us to attach that wire from single eye area to single eye wire, and in that way it's just a little bit neater and tidier than wrapping around 2 wires at once. So you'll go for your 5 wraps around the outside of that frame that creates the eye shape. So that's 1. Second visible, you can just flip those around to make it easier to see and easier to do. And once you've done that, you can trim that wire neatly. Or if you wanted to go for belt and braces again, you can tie that one more time. Let's just get that 5th visible wrap in really neatly and tidily. I'm just going to tighten up that coil by compressing it down, like so, making sure that the eye is where you want it to be. And what you can do here is just sneak that underneath the rest of the frame and draw that around the whole kit and caboodle. So we're connecting the outside wire, the right hand shoulder as we're looking at it, with that quick link. Pull that down into position neatly, and then you will be able to find a space to wrap 5 times around that wire at the end. I actually can't see the gap, but it is there because we left a gap. So you could just tease that open if you need to. Pop the wire in through, and then just go for 5 final wraps, just as belt and braces, and it helps hold the owl form together. Again, if you are wearing this as jewellery, it does make sense to have just a little bit more of those connections where possible. So I will go for the 5th wrap, and then I will love you and leave you for the day. So that's a 4th visible wrap. Let's get that last one in. The reason that we are able to find a space is because we've got those 5 wraps just on the side where the wing feathers are. So you know you'll be able to fit a wire through. There's that 5th wrap. If you wanted to use a longer piece of wire and continue wiring down, you absolutely can. I'm going for a little bit more of a less is more look today. So let's give that a squish, make sure that wire's nice and neat and tidy. Give that a tidy up. And then in a moment I will set that 2nd eye bead into position, and I will have completed my 2nd owl. So I'll just finish off those projects, then I'll take a photograph of all 3 side by side. I'll find some beads to fit the citrine owl, and then you can basically pick which one floats your boat best. Have yourself a beautiful day. Look forward to seeing you back again soon. Bye for now.